So there is Rachel, and what I just talked about. This is a special edition of our continuing programmatic and research and tech series, and we do these every month. So join us for that member activity. I wanted to say that we have our very special We Do Advisory Board, and this is a great program for all the women and all the guys that are on the call and all of our members. It's a series that takes people through how to build your personal and professional development. There are interactive workshops, and the next one is coming up soon as I'm juggling my screen here. It's a great group of leaders, as you can see here. Please join it. Jen runs the program. She's at Trade Desk. Debbie is the president of Novus and is the board and chair. And Alice Go from Captivate is building a lot of the strategic initiatives that we're doing here. As you can see by the titles, there's some great leaders in digital out of home here that are helping to shape and form this important initiative. And there we go. So the next one is on mentorship. It'll be talking about mentoring and menteeing. And that's March 24th. We'll be sending out mailings to our members on it. Please join us. It's a great way to raise your level. And then join us for the next member meeting. And if you want to easy access, just take a look and snap the flow code there. We're going to have Erin, who is the head of all global media at Microsoft, and she's going to talk about what they like about digital out of home and how they use it and what they'd like to see. Geetha has spoken with us a while back. She is the leading global media analyst for Bloomberg, and she's going to be talking about the resiliency of digital out of home and out of home in general, and also going to be coming with Bloomberg projections on out of home and the ad business. Geetha's really smart. She will also be joining with her will be the head of marketing at Bloomberg that just did a great takeover in Times Square with Outfront and some others, and they'll be talking about that takeover. And then the head of research and data at Wavemaker, as I'm really screwing up with all of this here, RJ. I've got too much on my screen. Sorry, everybody. We'll get back to that. So she's Delphine is the Chief Data Analytics Officer. And then Jeff Minsky, who's a reporter for Media Village and has spent a lot of time at agencies, Omnicom and others, will be giving us an update on what happened at the CES this year and its implications for the out-of-home world and its implications for brands around the world. So please join us. Take a picture of that. I think I've stalled long enough for you to take a snapshot and join us. It'll be a great event. This one will also be online, and we'll be doing some more in-person events as the year goes on. And then everybody joining us today, all the members will receive a recording, as you heard earlier, slides, an invitation to our next town hall event, in case you didn't have your phone with you, and the recent paper we did with Coachava, and the great advertiser decision maker study that was unveiled at the summit this year. Please take a look at that. It's helping to set a lot of strategies for marketing and sales from our organization for our industry. And now we're going to ask Rachel to take us through it. And I must say that Comscore is a great DPW member. They are working with a lot of our media owner members and others, helping to launch the industry forward, as they have a great history in television and cinema as well. And now they're doing a lot of work in digital out of home. Gary Werrick has been stewarding the charge and has done a great job along with Bill Livick. And now you're going to hear all the great knowledge that we're going to get from Rachel Gantz delivering that to us. So I now will stop my share, turn it over to Rachel, and look forward to seeing everybody at all our events coming up. And also, by the way, we're doing our Cannes Lion trip we're putting together now. So anybody that wants to join us on our annual excursion to the greatest ad festival of the year, please get in touch with any of us. Okay, Rachel, it's all you.
All right, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see my screen properly?
It's great.
Fantastic. Really appreciate you all having me today. Really excited to talk about programmatic growth as it relates to digital out of home. So I'm Rachel Gantz. I am the general manager of our activation and advertising solutions for Comscore. What we mean by activation is the data that we provision for programmatic targeting. So this has been an area live, eat, and breathe. The emergence of digital out of home in this space has been one of those certainly more interesting, definitely increasing in popularity phenomenons that we've seen last year and even more so already in 2022 and expected to increase. So we wanted to take a little bit of time today to dive into what we're seeing, some industry best practices, and then just open it up for questions. As we see digital out of home start to take a little bit more of a prominent role within programmatic, it's something that we've seen across the board, a lot more interest, a lot more folks leaning in. So in terms of some of the stats around that, with people spending more time outdoors, we've definitely seen there's some research there that points to consumers are noticing out-of-home ads 45% more than in pre-pandemic levels. And then we also have some stats pointing to the growth of the industry in general, where it's expected to grow over 10%, reaching 30 billion in terms of market size. And this last point here that I wanted to share, I think really speaks to a lot of what we're observing, which is the flexibility in buying options and where the data is available, I think is really helping to drive how folks are leaning into programmatic as it relates to digital out of home. And one of the things that we plan to talk about today. So for this conversation, we've really broken it down into a few key areas. One is cross-platform targeting. I thought it'd be helpful to take a little bit of a step back, see how we're approaching programmatic targeting, how we're observing others, especially with the importance of the consistency across digital out of home and other platforms from a targeting perspective, and dive a little bit into that. The second piece here is around cookieless world. So that is one thing that we are definitely starting to see everyone preparing for. It is not something that is any longer just off on the distant horizon. And it's a lot of where we're spending our time focusing, and we're noticing that others do as well. And then the digital out of home application and how folks are starting to lean into it, some best practices that we've seen, and some areas that we expect to continue to increase in throughout the year. And then, of course, we'll leave time for questions. So when we think about programmatic targeting, one of the things that's helpful and how Comscore resets itself and thinks about this area is we tap into the data assets, and there's lots of numbers here on the screen that people know us for in market. And there's a few key data assets within Comscore's offering that make our programmatic targeting segments possible. One is on the digital side. There's both the opt-in digital panels and the ability for us to see really at scale digital behaviors. The second, and I'll talk a little bit about how this works specifically within contextual, but we have Comscore acquired about five or 6 years ago a company called Proximic, and with that, our contextual crawler. We have the second largest contextual crawler in the market, only second to Google. And then our television data. So we have 75 access to viewership data on 75 million screens through our MVPD relationships. Those three key data assets enable us to do what we do from a programmatic standpoint. And I think it's helpful just as a refresher and level set, because this is exactly what will help us to create better segments for the digital out of home space specifically. When we think about the world of programmatic targeting, not just for Comscore, but in general, there's really two buckets that the programmatic targeting data falls into when we think about, generally speaking, for cross-platform targeting. The first of which is audience data. And that's what I have on the screen in front of you today, where whether from a traditional standpoint, whether we're talking about desktop, mobile, connected TV, YouTube, podcast, and now digital out of home, those are where we're making the data available. And the what that we're making available is all of the different insights into audience targets to align with someone's campaign. One of the things that we hear from buyers all the time from the buy side, whether it's brand direct or through agencies, is this is great, but it needs to align with some of the tactics that we're taking across the full scope of the campaign and not necessarily be specific for any one target. So that's why, and that's consistent across the board. So that's why it's really important to make sure from our standpoint, as we're starting to work with DSP partners on how we make some of this data available, that we do so in a really consistent manner to enable brands to have that consistency with which they're applying data for not just digital out of home, but their full campaign. So this is Comscore specific in terms of the types of data that we make available. Think age and gender demographic data, television, viewership data. This one is really popular, and I'll talk about this one a little bit later when we get into the digital out of home specific pieces, because entertainment is a big driver of advertising within the space based off of the conversations that we're having. So being able to enable television viewership behavior to that type of media is something that we've seen a lot of demand for. Different personas like sports fans or political views or cord cutters or different behaviors, life stages even, and OTT behaviors. And the best way to think of that is Netflix watchers or things of that nature that really drive into someone's OTT or CTV viewership behavior that then you can apply to all of these different inventory sources. The second area that we hear a lot of conversation about, especially as it relates to digital out of home, is contextual. And the funny piece on this one is the word contextual doesn't always mean the same thing to everybody. So traditionally, from a programmatic standpoint, how we're using contextual is to mean, generally speaking, what the content in which an ad is appearing is about. We know within the digital out of home space, just to level set on terminology, that word is actually often used to mean the environment in which a piece of content is being viewed, like elevator versus gas station or any of the other many areas in which you're seeing digital out of home. So I wanted to call that out, how we're using the word contextual on this slide to mean about the content that's being viewed, not necessarily just about the environment in which the screen is being seen. So generally speaking, across the programmatic industry, you see a lot with what I'll call traditional brand safety and contextual relevance, meaning what is the content about that my ad is showing up next to? And then what you've seen in terms, and I'll get into this in a little bit, a little more about cookieless world, is you're starting to see contextual applications. So using what the content is about to be predictors of different audience information about them. So what are different viewership behaviors, age and gender, et cetera, but it's not being driven from an ID basis, it's being driven from a contextual basis. And then again, the types of inventory this is being applied to: display, video, connected TV, podcast, sort of you name it. I think this is, at least from our perspective, a coming area as it relates to digital out of home, and I'll touch on it a little more, whereas the audience data is a little more prevalent today. But it'll be interesting to hear some of your perspectives as well in terms of what you're saying for what we can expect from 2022. I just wanted to highlight some more examples of the types of personas when we think about audience data that are out there. A lot of these get really granular. That can be, I guess, a good and a bad thing. It's really helpful for brands to be aligning to this. And you can see the types of detail that you can get into when it comes to audience data and the application of it, even within a digital out of home space. So to shift gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about the next generation of some of these applications, what we're calling predictive audiences, really showing how you can handle programmatic targeting in a cookie-free world. And when we think about cookies going away and what that means for the programmatic industry at large, generally speaking, there's a few different industry substitutes that are being put out there as solutions for how the industry is going to transact when cookies go away. The first of which is substitute identifiers. So this is that instead of using cookie as the identifier, there are a number of universal identifiers and different identity spines that are being put out there in market. I think when it comes to the industry overall, there's a little bit of a waiting game to see which will get enough scale and which will win out. And that is one area that there's lots of those popping up. The second way some folks are solving for this is IP address, where IP address being that transactable identifier. That one, generally speaking, personally, I don't think that one is going to be around for the long haul, just because a lot of this nature and taking a step back, why we're trying to solve for the deprecation of cookies as a programmatic industry is because of the privacy component, and transacting on IP address doesn't necessarily really fulfill that privacy-centric approach that the industry is really demanding of us. And then the third one here, and this is an area Comscore is really leaning very heavily into, is context and being able to use sort of next generation contextual signals and solutions in order to help propel the industry forward. That is one area where we're really seeing a lot of innovation. We're really excited about some partnerships that we have in place with folks like Polk and L2 for political data, you name it, in order to be able to provide programmatic targeting solutions in that cookie-free world. The way we do this is through a few key data assets that Comscore has. So one being our opt-in panels, the second being our contextual engines. So we're able to say, okay, let's look at a seed set of individuals who perform any specific behavior. In this instance, I'm showing football watchers. We can look at all of the content these folks are consuming because we have that visibility into other pieces of content that they're doing. And then understanding, because of our contextual engine, really the very granular categories that those folks are popping for. This shows it as an index. It's not really an index. Our data science team hates this slide because it makes it seem a lot more rudimentary than the data science behind it actually is. But the best way to think about it is that translation from a specific audience behavior into a content category. So what does this all mean for digital out of home and what we're actually here to talk about today? I wanted to set that as the ground stage because I do think it's important that in order for programmatic digital out of home to really take off, it needs to align with everything else programmatic that's going on in the industry from Comscore or from anyone else, because that's how the advertisers are really approaching integrating this into their plans. And then again, from a digital out of home standpoint, when you think of those two broad buckets of how you can enable audience behaviors or contextual signals, those are the two real areas that are available within the market today for the DSPs, for digital out of home specific DSPs. We see a lot more folks leaning in thus far on the audience side in terms of making that data available for programmatic digital out of home buys. But I think a lot of the future and where we're going to continue to see innovation is on the contextual side. So whether that's content signals about the content around where an ad is being shown or shown just before it on that screen, or even contextual signals about that environment in which the ad is being shown. Today, from a programmatic standpoint and audience standpoint, so Comscore has a few partnerships in place with a few providers who are very much thinking about digital out of home as a key component of inventory types that they're leaning into. The Trade Desk, LiveRamp, and Vistar are some partnerships that we have in place today. And as I alluded to before, with showing you sort of the broad nature of the available audience segments that are available within these and other platforms who these connect to, that's the right way to think about the types of data that are available. This is what we're seeing most commonly today within the programmatic space for digital out of home, for leaning in, where you're able to tap into the different device graphs and identity spines that these platforms have already enabled, plug into existing data. And in many instances, it literally is the exact same segment an advertiser might be using for the rest of their programmatic buy, but now they're able to apply that from programmatically speaking to their digital out of home buy as well. The other option that I alluded to, this is, I think, a little more future-proof. The technology is ready to do this today. It's not a technology issue. I think it's more of an adoption issue where folks are leaning in more on the audience side, but with some of the challenges that we highlighted of scale and some of the future components, I'm expecting to complement the audience side, that folks to start leaning in a little more on the contextual options. So you can see here, there's a lot of different context that you can be applying to the content that's showing up on that screen, whether this is an example of from different categories, brand safety, and then even predictive audience, those contextually driven audience signals that you can be applying within a different atmosphere so that the ad can make sure when it's programmatically delivered that if it's showing up right after a piece of content, that it really aligns nicely with what the advertiser would be looking for where they want their ad to be shown. This is an area that we talk about a lot. Digital out of home is an important strategic priority for Comscore as we look to 2022. So it's one that we're really excited to be engaging on. So this is where we want to throw out there that if different platforms are at different stages of being able to adopt and putting out some of these tactics from a programmatic standpoint, it's something we're really excited about. So we're excited to work with all of you. If there's either particular segments, particular categories, or just generally speaking, how do we move the envelope forward in terms of what we can bring to market for programmatic to really enable it, because with the growth we've already seen, but I think the potential out there, there's a lot more that we can do as an industry to make the same types of targeting tactics that folks are used to with the rest of their buy available within this space. So that was the content that we had prepared. Happy to open it up to conversation or questions if there's time.
I guess, can you folks put questions into the chat and let us know? And thank you very much for that, Rachel. And I like the fact that you're taking advantage of the cookieless world that we're entering into, which is great, by talking about context, because it's something that we as an industry do really well. And you also seem to be taking into context for your contextual measurement, not only the area of which the screen is in, but the content on the screen. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of our really big focuses for this year is tying the content on the screen to the opportunity for an ad to show in just as relevant as content as humanly possible.
And how, let me ask, so if say we've been actually, I like to hear this because we've been encouraging a lot of our members to put content on, because all of our research shows that if there's not just ads, but there's content on screens, that people will look, people will engage more, and we actually have notices that brands will buy more. So that's great. As our members are putting more content on, you may find some members may have entertainment in one break and then 15 minutes later say news. Can you account for that? It's unlike, as a gross example, CNN running 24/7 of all news. It's easy to track the content. Where content may change, can you grasp that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the areas that is still evolving within the programmatic digital out of home space. So the way it works within the traditional programmatic space is the DSPs, the demand side platforms will send folks like Comscore through contextual integrations, different signals about the content surrounding an ad opportunity, whether that's in a traditional digital standpoint from a URL or a mobile app ID or things of that nature. The same can be absolutely applied within the digital out of home space. It's just a matter of connecting with and understanding what are those contextual content information that each of the platforms have at their disposal that they're able to pass, and making sure that Comscore or another provider is able to decipher that into something that they can say, okay, this is entertainment related content. This would be a good ad opportunity for a network trying to promote a new show or something of that nature.
Good, and we'll help you in ideally getting the media owners to send you that information. We have a question from Nick, but I just want to say, I mean, I'd love to see you, and you call it your massive audience accumulation. It's great because, as we all know, the more impressions you get, the more audience you look at, the more robust the measurement is. And, as TV's been measured for years by that other company, those sample sizes were, I think, somewhat infinitesimal to what you're doing. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, we're really, scale is one of the key differentiators for us. And it's something we're really excited about, both in terms of the scale of the underlying data assets that we use to provision this data, but also the scale of the application of the data. And that's something that's really important because no advertiser wants, if you have great data, but they're not going to be able to reach that many people with it, like that's not something that's very interesting for them. So making sure that we have scale on both sides is a really important component as we started to really lean into the programmatic space.
Excellent. Please put your questions in. I'm going to read one from Nick now. Nick Haggard, is Comscore, in case you're not busy enough, is Comscore driving demand with buyers across their measured properties?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do when we go to market is Comscore does have a dedicated team who works with the agency holding codes and brands direct in terms of making sure our targeting and measurement solutions are available to them to help with their media buys. So that's definitely an area of focus. And that's honestly what's driven a lot of what I was talking through about the need for consistency is coming from those conversations, because while there's the foundational components like age and gender, of course, we know that's always going to be prevalent when we think about any media buy. But as you start to get more into advanced audiences from their different types of behaviors, that's where we're starting to see a lot of desire for consistency across applications, whether it's CTV, digital out of home, traditional digital, frankly, even linear, but starting to connect all those dots so that they're having consistent definitions of the audiences and the targets they're trying to reach.
Hey, Rachel, this is Gary. Real quick, on the slide, you only mentioned LiveRamp and the Trade Desk. Can you just address the fact that our audiences are everywhere in the ecosystem?
Absolutely. So our data is on the shelf in every single DSP and DMP. I highlighted those because those are ones we're leaning into, especially as it relates to digital out of home and other platforms who are reaching out to leaning into digital out of home. But as it relates to the full programmatic ecosystem, our data is literally everywhere.
Great, and please get any other questions in. So certainly, and I applaud you guys for looking at the world of context, as I mentioned earlier, and in light of not only what we do well as an industry, but in light of cookie deprecation. And I therefore assume that all of your data is privacy scrubbed, anonymized, and basically fine. And maybe you just want to talk to the privacy aspects of what you do.
Absolutely. So I spend more of my life talking to privacy lawyers than I ever imagined I would. There are a lot of steps that we go through for any of Comscore's data assets to make sure it is GDPR, CCPA compliant, in addition to really just driving privacy centricity with the solutions we're bringing. That's why I wanted to highlight some of what we're doing that we're calling cookieless, but it's also very much privacy centric, as we want to help the industry to find that right balance where we're able to serve folks relevant ads, because we know consumers like that better, while we are genuinely respecting the privacy. So there's a lot of work that goes in from getting to our underlying data assets and being able to leverage that data, model it appropriately, take these necessary steps to make sure we really are respecting the privacy of the consumer.